Thanks, David. Okay, well, here's what's going to happen. I'm going to share a little bit about how this session came about. I'll share a little bit about my background with the well-being work. And then I will introduce our guests from Bega Valley in New South Wales, Australia, who are here joining this call in partnership with Wellbeing Economy Alliance California. Thanks, David, for your partnership. Um, and my work with Civic Wellbeing Partners and the Santa Monica Human Relations Council. Welcome, Maria.
Hi.
Um, so I started working in the well-being space in about 2018. Really, my whole career has been in community engagement, civic learning, and community level well-being. Um, I joined the team at the city of Santa Monica at the time, who were working to produce a community level well-being index. Um, and it's that work that has really adapted, evolved over the years. We're now in a local nonprofit called the Santa Monica Human Relations Council, where we do a lot of our community work. And Julie Rusk and I, who Julie just joined the call, work together both at the local work and through our Civic Wellbeing Partners practice, where we share some of the learnings that came out of Santa Monica with other communities. So, how we got connected to you all in Bega Valley was actually through Kate Solis, who's here, who's the president of the Bega Valley Data Collective. She and I connected earlier this year, and actually just without any intention behind it, kind of randomly, it was the week of the Los Angeles fires. So the mega fires in January happened to be the week that Kate and I first connected. And we talked a bit about our shared work, her research in well-being, and my background in the well-being work. But we were quickly just kind of, I was so in it with the fires, and we were speaking to um, a lot of these shared experiences that folks in Australia had in the 2019, 2020 Black Summer Bushfires. And what we were really noticing was how important it is to share some of our learnings and practices across the world, across communities, because here in Los Angeles, wildfires are nothing new, but this was a whole different experience. I've lived in Southern California my whole life and never experienced anything like this. Um, and so, and I think we had a lot of resonance between the work to spark well-being initiatives through really difficult times. So that's what the folks at Bega Valley Data Collective are going to be here to share. Um, I just had a couple more things that I wanted to highlight, which was, in our conversations, we've talked about like some really amazing strategies that they've had for really bringing community voice and community power to the forefront of how fire recovery happens. We've talked about how important it is to resource this work and invest in this work through multiple types of disasters. And I just want to say, like today, July 8th, 2025, we are just about at the 6 month marker since the LA fires. And to the point of kind of dealing with multiple disasters at a time, we are seeing, the 6 month marker of these LA fires at the same time that LA is seeing federal troops storming our parks. People are not feeling very safe here. So I think they have some really wonderful lessons around just how building community resiliency can, really guide our recovery efforts. So without further ado, I'll let them introduce themselves, but hand it over to April.
Thanks, Catalina. Yeah, we really value your connection, our connection with you, and we've learned a lot from you, and we really want to foster this community connection for the future. I know we can share a lot of information, and we learn from both each country of all of our. There's always similarities in what we're going through, no matter where we are. So yes, I'm April Merrick, and I'm the Vice President of the Bega Valley Data Collective. And I also am a Program Manager in the organization called Foundation for Regional and Rural Renewal. And Carolyn Adler is also a colleague of mine in that organization. So she'll from present some information on and we'll talk a bit more about it's Foundation for Regional, Rural and Renewable, but we call it FRRR because it's a very difficult name to say. Um, so I'll introduce Tim Whitaker, my colleague at the Bega Valley Data Collective.
Thanks, April. Yeah, and I share April's um, interest in connecting with you guys, and a bit of it's a the downside of disasters around the world are well known, but there's an upside that it can bring organisations and people together to look at further, not just recovery of but also well-being and other sorts of things. So yeah, looking forward to giving you a bit more of an idea of what we experienced and what we've started. I don't think we've got all the answers for you. I don't think I think they're yet to be uncovered in a lot of ways, but we can certainly share what we've done so far. And yeah, I'm probably the founder of the Bega Valley Data Collective, and April probably is the second person I talked to when I first had the idea of forming the Bega Valley Data Collective, and I'm currently the treasurer of that organisation.
And I'll introduce Carolyn Adler.
Thanks, April. Yeah, thanks for having us, everyone. And I again echo the sentiments of being able to share globally is actually quite a privilege in this and it's because of this modern age, I guess, where we will have access to this beautiful technology. I work with April and on at FRRR, and we are going to do a little presentation. But the program I've been working on is a place-based program, which we'll dive into a little bit deeper. I'm a little bit further north than April and Tim, so I'm in the Eurobodalla Shire, which is the shire that neighbours the Bega Valley and part of those catastrophic bushfires reached from, I think it was probably like a 500-kilometre front along the coastline from there. So yeah, quite a large disaster. I might hand over to you, April, and are we happy to just kick into the presentation?
Yes, yeah, I'll start off.
Yeah, okay, awesome. I'm going to actually share some slides.
We'll start with, I'll give an introduction and then I'll pass over to Tim.
Tim, sorry.
Yeah, I'll let you know. So yeah, so I'll just give, so you probably may remember or seen the images of what happened to Australia. Australia is not new to disasters. It's a common thing to us, but the fire season that we had in 2019 to 2020 was one of it was the biggest one we've ever had. It went for 9 months. It was the whole fire season for us. It ripped through, burnt through 59 million acres of bushfire, bush area and towns across the eastern states of Australia. It decimated landscapes, lives, and communities. The fires probably hit worst in our area, so we were the last area that had the fire, and that was it hit our area on New Year's Eve 2019, and then it just kept burning until the fire was actually designated as being put out in May. So it was quite a long time. And a week or so after that, COVID was announced and our lockdown happened. So all of our plans, and at that time, Tim and I were working in the Shire Council the Bega Valley Shire Council. So we're working in economic development department. So we were privy to all of the funding and support and resources and how that was being distributed in our area. So in our area, our council was managing the disaster recovery. So we had a front side, view of what was happening. And some of the things were good, but some of the things we could see weren't really that informed by what community needed. And so out of that, I think one of the main things that I actually took out of this fire disaster and what we're seeing now is it actually brought a lot of the community together. And now we're 5 years on, we're at long-term recovery. So we saw in those initial short-term recovery that people were in that elated state of, let's gather together, we've got something to align around. And that was okay, but it was really hampered with COVID. So when you have a disaster, the best thing to do is to join up in, people to support each other. But it was really quite difficult. We had to be really creative around that. But what we've seen over time, some communities have recovered. Well, not fully recovered, but they're doing well, and other communities haven't, and there's reasons for those. And some communities now, 5 years on, are still sort of in the really trauma issues. And some of those things, and there's other good things that came out of it. There's some really innovative initiatives where people came together and said, well, this needs not being met, so we're going to create something. So organisations like the Bega Valley Data Collective came out of it. So on that note, I'll pass over to Tim to give you some more information about what we did.
Thanks, April. Yeah, and it was certainly classed as a catastrophic event for bushfires, but also there was leading up to that there was a very prolonged drought. So there was on that, and there were other bushfires. There was the Tathra bushfires, which 70 houses were lost, and there's another bushfire. So it was, and the combination of that and the COVID lockdown certainly put a lot of pressure on the community, and a lot of highlighted a lot of to me it highlighted a lot of things in that how we not only respond to disasters, how the community can stand up, and the word resilience was used a lot over the years, and I think a lot of people, especially those people who are directly affected, who lost their homes or whatever, got sick of hearing about resilience when they were basically traumatized and in recovery mode. So I guess how the data collector came out from, as I said, April and I worked in the council. I was involved in business support, which was a funded position through the bushfires, and I was out there talking to a lot of people in the community, and I guess from that observation, I really saw that it was the initial reaction was because things. I don't know what happens over your part of the world, but if there's an event around Christmas time when all the media sort of cycle closes down, it tends to get a lot of media attention. So there was a heap of media attention about this, and it was well publicised, and that intensity of the media brought a lot of funding, both from not only from federal government, from state government, from local governments, to philanthropic organisations, to other organisations. Everybody just wanted to throw money at the situation and try and do something, and often that focused on certain areas that the media focused on as well. So when I observed that, you could see that funding, though it was great that people were recognising trying to do that by putting both money and resources into the recovery, it had because the community weren't really involved or weren't really ready to, they were in that sort of recovery mode, and a lot of the money was about building resilience. The timing of it, I thought, wasn't quite right, and a lot of that money was being put into how that money was to be used was designed by people outside of the community, by somebody who didn't really understand what was happening in the community. So although the money was good, I could see it wasn't hitting the right, the timing wasn't right, and it was just because people wanted to help, they and they thought the only way they could do it is put more money into the situation. And a lot of organisations started up based on just getting that funding, or based on people from outside the community, what their ideas were on how the community should respond or react to that particular disaster. It did, April talked about bringing the community together. I did see this overwhelming funding thing have a bit of a negative impact on communities, where people were getting some money and people saying, well, how come they're getting money and we aren't? Or it created this sort of bit where the community was fragmented to it, which it was a downside of that. So when we saw that, and I saw that, and I thought, well, this is not really right. The community should have a bigger say, not only in this, but also how but there's no sort of structure. How do you approach the community to find out what they really want? So this was the idea that was in my head, and I guess it was by coincidence that I end up on a webinar with an organisation called Seed Data and Analytics, and they were all about giving data to the community so they could use that as evidence-based and make place-based decisions, and have a voice. And I suddenly sort of those two things formulated in mind. I said, well, this is probably a way to build some sort of structure or some give that in voice to the community, because for them to stand up and have a say on what they wanted was good. But everybody, there's a lot of people doing that, but to cut through that, they needed the evidence to be able to push that point of view or what they wanted to change through to. And so I thought, data is probably the conduit or the mechanism to be able to empower the community with a voice, to be able to give them a say in what's happening. So that's when that idea, and as I said, I thought this could be good. And then I thought about an idea about forming an organisation that promoted that, and that's when I went to April and things started rolling from there. How we went about it, basically, I pulled on all the people I knew in my network together and pulled them together and said, hey, let's do something. And we formed a working group and we started having meetings, and we went through a process. And because we're all just volunteers in that organisation and had no money, but we sort of pulled ourselves up by the bootstraps and got a bit of funding to form our organisation to make it official. And then we sort of went through these things. We had a lot of ideas, but they were unproven. We didn't know with this organisation, SEER, we'd be able to, use that organisation and their platform to be able to develop community data and make it in a way that was presentable and the community could use. So we had a project where where it was like a proof of concept, where we got some money to be able to provide data, and that brought out that yes, we could use that organisation to provide access to the community, a good data, but also in a form that was presentable and that they could use and understand. Just the type of data, I guess. Once we started looking, there's a whole heap of data around that you can do, and we've got probably access to more data than we need at the moment in a lot of ways. Yet there's other data we need that we can't get. But we formalised that a couple of basic things about data. We wanted to have the data to show what's really happening in the Bega Valley. So it needed to be able to be the data to be filtered down to that level of a local government area. and so that restricted to some sort of data. A lot of that data was you couldn't only access at a national level or a state level, but we wanted to be able to get data at a local government area. So that was one thing. And the other thing we said, we wanted to show, well, the data wanted to show, well, how did our local government area compare to other local government areas? And then how did it compare to the state, or how it compared nationally? So it showed where we were the advantaged or disadvantaged here in the Bega Valley. And the other thing we wanted to do, we wanted to show if there what trends were happening. So over a period of time, that data, how that was changing and what the trends were happening here in the Bega Valley. So we managed to sort of, I guess the first big step for us was we got some funding, and thanks to Carolyn and FRRR in the Investing in Rural Communities Futures program, we got some funding to do measuring what matters in the Bega Valley, because we had a lot of ideas, but we didn't really know if the community had those same ideas. So we set out and we did surveys and workshops and things which were really surprising. The community was overwhelming, supporting the idea to have a say in matters that affected their well-being, and they wanted to have a voice and wanted to have a say, and they weren't satisfied with the way decisions were being made from the top-down approach. They wanted to be involved in having a say. And also, we tested the idea, well, what is well-being? Do people want to consider the normal economic metrics that we use now, or do they want to take that further and look at other well-being indicators in data? And again, that was actually, I think the survey showed that financial type data or economic type data was the last on the list. They wanted to look at other things that involve their safety, the community cohesion and inclusiveness, and a whole range of things. And that was really, so I guess from that project we said, yeah, okay, well, yeah, people want to have a say, want to have a voice, and they're interested in the broad range of wellbeing indicators as far as data goes. So from that, I guess we sort of changed track a bit. We started talking about data, which is a bit of a hard sell when you're talking to people. Data, people consider all sorts of things. So we've sort of retracked, and we now call it Living Well in the Bega Valley, and we talk about building a wellbeing framework. Data underpins that, but what our focus is on is we don't want to find what data metrics people use or what causes or what changes we need. We want the community. We really truly want that grass-led movement to occur at a community level, and everybody have their say. So they're focusing our direction of going out to the community and getting get them to participate in that framework, get their ideas, and use data to be able to advocate for change. I think that's about it. Some of the other projects we're now looking at, because for us, like you guys, I guess, to make all this happen, we need funding. We're a volunteer organisation, and so we've started a project on youth wellbeing. We're talking to the young people to get their idea, and we want to get funding to continue that project. And we're also looking at measuring what matters, phase 2, or measuring what matters to live well in the Bega Valley, where we'll take it back to the community to get their involvement and build their data that they want to use to be able to give them that voice and empower them to make changes that affect their well-being. Happy to answer questions on a bit more on what we went about following the data collector later in the session.
Yeah, I think we'll maybe pass it over to Carolyn next, and then we'll leave about 20 minutes for Q&A at the end.
Excellent. Great. I'm hopefully sharing my screen there well and properly. Oh,
Yes, just
great.
presenter mode.
Do you want to go down in the very
It's
bottom
okay.
of
It disappeared on me. Oh, can everyone see that properly now?
No, it's just you can see your slides on the side as well.
If you go to the very bottom, there's presentation mode right next to the slider from like the size of it.
I apologize. It ended up on the wrong screen.
Oh yeah, if you stop sharing and then restart, it'll do it.
I've practiced before and now it didn't work. Okay.
It always happens.
Oh, yeah. So that should be
There you go.
Perfect.
Oh,
no, wrong one.
Let me get rid of that. Sorry. Okay, they're the notes. Okay, go for it. Sorry, April.
That's all right. I'll just introduce Carolyn Adler again. And yes, so this is the organisation we work for, Foundation for Rural and Regional Renewal. Next slide. In Australia, we always like to do an acknowledgement of country, of where we are. So I would just like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the Jurunganj and Thawa people of the Yuin Nation and pay our respects to elders past, present and emerging. We draw on the incredible wisdom of Aboriginal people and their connection and care to country and recognise that ground that we walk on was and always will be Aboriginal land. What we'll share today, well, mostly Carolyn will share, is about some of the things that Carolyn does really well. She works in the more people-based, place-based programs where it's more intensive working with people. And definitely Carolyn has worked a lot with bushfire recovery and also has worked a lot with how to leverage community and how can community leverage from funding and how does community get funders to support the things that they actually need. Okay, next slide. So the Foundation for Rural and Regional Renewal has been around for 25 years. We support rural, regional, remote communities in Australia. We try to, the organisation came about because it's a partnership between the Australian government and philanthropy, and a main funder in Australia is the Sydney Myer Fund. And this organisation really started because the government and funders could see that rural, remote, and regional Australia wasn't faring as well as Metro Australia, and so they knew they needed to put funding into communities, and the way that we do it is through grants and capacity building support. And our ethos is really we like to fund what the communities say they need instead of what the funders say they want to fund. So Carolyn works a lot with funders to, try to educate them about, how do you, it's good to know to think of what you want to fund, but it's always probably you get better outcomes if you listen to what the communities actually need. So I'll pass over to Carolyn.
Thanks, April. Yeah, it's quite a privilege to work with this organisation. So what we do is we have a number of programs and granting. We do have some very bespoke and specific place-based programs. So I'd like to talk about the one that Tim alluded to before, which is the Investing in Rural Community Futures program. And again, an acronym we like to use is IRCF because it's another mouthful. And so with the Investing in Rural Community Futures program, it was identified through data as well where a lot of the applications we were receiving and our impact study showed that people were asking for funding for capacity building. And we were finding a pattern that kept emerging. And working with a donor, our CEO worked with a donor to design a place-based program that is the Investing in Rural Community Futures. And it launched in 2018. And the timing's a little bit important because I just wanted to share it in relation to the fires. So it launched in 2018 in 3 pilot communities. So they were in regional New South Wales. And a midterm review in 2021 demonstrated that the impact and that it was working. And a following report was collated around a national report around the heartbeat of Australia, and again reinforced that there was this huge gap and need for people to have more capacity. A lot of our organisations are run purely by volunteers, and just that information or that skills gap was there. So this program was designed around that, and it was really around really leaning into that long-term investment and having and engaging philanthropists and other donors that were prepared to do multi-year investment. So this program is a 5-year program. And I'll talk about the elements of the program a little bit, because I feel like some of the elements can be used, like whilst the whole program in its entirety is the proven model, there's definitely small elements within it that make a huge difference in community. So the model itself was to have local facilitators. So you employ, and that's the goal of the program, is having an embedded facilitator in those regional communities. And we co-design a roadmap, or what are the gaps, what are the capacity gaps within community, and we co-design those with community through a series of workshops, sometimes some additional surveys if we didn't quite get enough information, which is actually what we did in the Bega Valley. Was we didn't quite get enough, so we then put a survey in place to gather just a little bit more information. And we only, the people that are eligible for any funding attached are the locally governed grassroots not-for-profit. So not that middle tier NGO, which is non-government organisations, or no local government organisations. So yeah, and the encouragement, it's encouraged to apply for funding that supports collaboration and that benefits the whole community, which is what Tim was talking about around identifying what is it the whole community need, and the project that they do was exactly that. Let's find out what the community needs. So it was another additional layer on our workshop. So it was amazing. And of course, there was an embedded evaluation, which I mentioned. So the pillars that we work with, and I'm just going through these quickly because I feel like there's a little bit more gold in storytelling. So just to set it up, so there's these 4 pillars that we identified that the capacity building need was emerging. So there was efficiencies. So that's that collaborative piece and just fostering relationships, building networks, people, and investing in people in roles, as well as investing in people in leadership capabilities, and bringing, again, people together to share their skills. And then, of course, strategy, which is a really important pillar around organisations didn't tend to have strategic plans or operational plans, sustainability plans, succession plans, fundraising plans. All of these things just were lacking, and they were kind of always scrambling. So we're really helping them to build some strategy around, particularly around their social enterprises. And also systems. So we did fund some upgrades to computers, or upgrades to operating systems or websites and things like that. So that's the pillars, and happy to answer more about that a little later. And just as April has already shared with us, the Black Summer Fires happened in 2019-20. And in that time, we had already established ourselves a little bit with this program. So it started early 2019 on the South Coast. So we were there in the community, which is not what FRRR generally are. We're not really always there at the immediate response stage. We're more a long-term recovery partner that fund things that way. So the fact that we were in the community and and the loss was huge, and the trauma was quite evident, and the exacerbation of COVID really affected the well-being and the engagement of a lot of the volunteers. So what we noticed at that time was that the funding, which Tim was talking about, that funding just comes, and some of the community groups weren't ready. Like, they just didn't have the ability to apply. They were pushing back. They were overwhelmed and stressed, and it was people, and it was amazing, the generosity, but people really just didn't know how to access that funding. And so we were sort of in the community, with this program. And so what we did was we then reached out to the Australian government and then applied for funding under their social stream to enhance what we were already doing. And so that was wonderful. We also partnered with another foundation that wished to give to the bushfire appeal. So we said, well, we need to add another community. Would you be prepared to do that? So they came on board and did that as well. And then we also took this program concept to the government around the Bega Valley. And whilst we didn't have grant funding for the Bega Valley, we did receive a pool of money that we could then activate and get down to the grassroots level. So we were very privileged there, and that leverage of being ready and funding ready. And this is what we're trying to get the community groups to be funding ready as well. So in the communities themselves, so this is a little bit about what happened. So after all of the programs were delivered, what we found was those groups that now had strategies, they now had plans in place, they started to work together. Some groups weren't prepared to work with us for at least 12 months because they were still suffering from the trauma of the fires. But what they reported was on top of the money the funding that they'd received from us, they also then went on to receive another $7 million worth of funding because they were able to apply for that funding because they had strategies. They had what we call bottom drawer projects ready to go. And quite incredible. And those larger numbers in Narrow and Bateman's Bay, some of those were for infrastructure projects that we funded the scoping study or the plan, and then they were able to then present that and receive money, which was pretty impressive. A lot of organisations also reported that their self-generated income had gone up, and they now understood how to activate their social enterprise idea, which was a little bit like Tim was saying, oh, you have ideas and then how do you activate it? So people were then activating them, which was just amazing. And so how this happened was the people pillar that I spoke about earlier. The organisations were applying to place a person in a role, so employing a project officer, subsidising the CEO role so the CEO could step out and do strategy, creating some ability for wellbeing for their volunteers, taking people away and keeping them engaged and just checking in on each other. And also some organisations never had ever a funded role as a leader. So it actually funding the first ever CEO role of a volunteer organisation. So that's how a lot of that capacity and leverage happened for community groups. So the methods of co-design and the actual engagement that we undertook with the communities is probably something that you're all quite familiar with and quite across. So I won't go into great detail, but more than happy to answer a little bit later. But we did utilise art of hosting techniques, which is captures that patterns of inquiry, it's circle practice, processes like World Cafe or designing for wiser action, and just enabling the community to have a safe space to feel connected and to check in and to really identify what it is that they needed, particularly around that capacity building that we had. And also just utilising that well-crafted questions, which again, I'm sure you're all familiar with. I've just popped just around once, if you spend the time to to identify a really well-crafted question, then the answers just seem to flow when you create a beautiful space for the community to come and join and explore those questions.
The area that you're covering. So a really well-crafted question, and there's some examples on the screen there, can be really helpful for people to see, okay, what is the purpose of coming together? And I feel like I can see myself as being able to be part of that conversation and contribute. So it's good just to stop and pause and think about that with a little bit more depth than probably what we've done in our fast lives in the past.
I jumped in. So really, with the, sorry about that jumping in, that was Monique Carson, who is one of our community facilitators, that was just speaking about well-crafted questions there and art of hosting techniques. And of course, circle practice, which I'm sure you're all very familiar with, but happy to talk about that a little bit more. But really just always creating that space. Every single community interaction that we had, we opened and closed with a circle. And particularly circle, the one down in the bottom left-hand corner, that's a beautiful morning tea that we held in the Botanic Gardens. That entire Botanic Garden was fully burnt out by the bushfires, and it was always wonderful to sit. You can even see, if you look closely in the top corner of that photo, you can see a little animal, a nesting box, which a lot of volunteers made nesting boxes to bring the native fauna back into the community and into the environment. So it was a beautiful environment to always try and take people back into the environment to get them back out of their houses and things like that. So and another way I just wanted to share was one other, and this particularly was in the Bega Valley, and where the Bega Valley really identified that they wanted to network, but they were exhausted. So they wanted to really do it with purpose, and they wanted to also have access to subject matter experts. So after talking to them a lot, we set up a series of workshops called Fill the Gaps. And we delivered many of these sessions, so around planning and and around capacity building in general, and how to manage conflict. It was really interesting around their well-being. It was really highly subscribed. So we actually ran it again, and then more people came, and so we ran how to manage conflict again, and we ran that session with a local facilitator, actually, which was amazing that we had this person in the community. And we ran that session 4 times over the year, and different people every time, fully subscribed every time. It was just about identifying what they, that the community really were telling us what they needed, and they got a lot from it, and the feedback was always quite amazing. I've just got some lovely photos there of all of the beautiful people that participated and met with us and gave their time to build their own roadmaps. They're all different communities spread across the south coast of New South Wales, and it really, you can see there each time, each different community had their own question and had their own goal and their own determination to solve the issues that they were facing. So yeah, that was just. And if we've got enough time, we have enough time for like a little 2-minute video. Catalina?
I want to make sure we have time for Q&A. We've got 13.
Yeah,
is it possible for us to send it afterward?
Yes,
okay.
We can.
Thank
Beautiful.
you.
Excellent. All right, I will pass back over to you.
Thank you. Thank you all for sharing those reflections. I want to open it up right into Q&A, so please raise your hand or put your questions in the chat. A lot of really resonant themes coming up for me, so I'll give people a moment to raise their hands here. Go ahead, Julie.
Pat, I'll just jump in to just because I know we're first of all, really interesting. Thank you all for traversing time zones and making this happen. So thank you. the last point on managing conflict, and that you said you offered that 4 times, I'm wondering if it ended up resulting in any practices that you would then use outside of the trainings, because this topic of managing conflict is very resonant for us as well. So I'm just wondering if you can say a little more about kind of what you learned and how those practices translated into your work.
Depending on some of the attendees at those sessions. So some were in organisations, so they definitely took things back and implemented, and particularly with boards, so that in volunteer organisations where this is the feedback I've had from different individuals. So some organisations had trouble translating what they were trying to achieve on the ground to their board, and vice versa. So they definitely did take away learnings about how to communicate upwards, or just how to share the strategy and the things that they were learning on the ground. So yeah, it was really, really useful. Yeah, and we also did train, talking about art of hosting, we also did provide an opportunity for community members to be trained in art of hosting techniques, which also has an element around conversations that matter, and the feedback was really quite strong on that as well.
Thank you. I saw Maria and then David.
Yes, well, first of all, thank you for the wonderful presentation. I wanted to know, when you were designing the capacity building for the community, how did you determine what was needed?
So we ran workshops that brought the community in, and then we explored through World Cafe exercises what capacity needs they felt that was lacking within their community, or what would make a difference for the community cohesion going forward, particularly following the fires and COVID. And those were the only parameters we had. So it was really about what they needed. The only parameters was just aligning it with those 4 pillars. And that really was more to help us to a bit of a sense making around it. So we then created those roadmaps, and then we fed them back to the community, and they sense checked and came back to us and said, yes, that's definitely where we really want to go. And then because there's never infinite funding, so then they would either collaborate on applying for a fund, or one person might take the lead, one group might take the lead and then share what they've learned. So if they created policies and procedures, for example, one group would do that, and then they'd share all of those back to the rest of the community.
Right. Thank you.
That's okay.
Go ahead, David.
Thank you. Appreciate all this. Got some questions about the well-being data and metrics that were collected. I'm curious if you could maybe share an example or 2 or 3 of like what specific metrics were collected, and were they measured over time, and just a little more color on what that looked like would be great. Thank you.
I think you might be referring to us there, David, so thanks for that question. The data we had access to was a lot of open data. So there was a lot of, for example, public data. We have a government organisation called the Australian Bureau of Statistics, or ABS, who primarily collect and provide a lot of data. So we channeled a lot of that. We've just some examples of that. We looked into we knew the Bega Valley had an ageing population, but we were able to identify we were in the top 5% of LGAs as far as an ageing population, we'd also look into sort of the number of people on pensions and things in the Bega Valley. And you would think that with an ageing population and an increase of people approaching pension age, that there'll be more people on pensions, but there actually isn't. So that remains flat. So it showed that there was a lot of people. That ageing population comes with a lot of demands on the, I suppose, the community as far as supporting that ageing population. And it showed that there was a lot of people moving into the area because people move into the area for the lifestyle. Where I suppose a lot of national parks and a lot of bush areas and a lot of beaches you can go to that are virtually deserted and have to yourself. So it attracts a lot of retirees moving to the area for that lifestyle. So that's just one of the things we identified. There was education levels in the Bega Valley were very low. We identified as far as degrees or university type educations, there was more people getting trade educations. There was more people leaving, not going through to finish high school compared to other areas. We could access things on crime data that showed crime was actually over time was reducing, and there were some areas of crime that were increasing. So things we could go on. The interesting thing about you can build all stories around that about well-being, in a lot of ways. What we found, although we had access to a lot of data that showed different things, we needed the context around that data. We need to build community stories around that data to make any sense of it. As anybody knows, when you look into data, you can quote data and use that to tell any sort of story. But we really need the community to say, well, stand up and say, well, this is what the data shows. This is what we want. This is what's actually happening. This is what we want to change. So data doesn't give you the whole story. That community stories. We haven't. We're opening. We have through that connection with Seed Data Analytics. We've got a ability to ingest data into their platform, collect data, and cover all the privacy concerns and things like that. And that's something I know there's a lot of local data out there that would provide a more nuanced or a more granular idea of what's happening in the Bega Valley, though. But that's a difficult task of collecting that data to be used publicly. But we're certainly open to that, and hopefully that's one of the next steps we'll get into.
Thank you.
And just on our data, David, if you're really interested, you go to our website, it's register. You can just register it for free. It doesn't cost anything, and you get access to all our data that we've got there. And you can see, of course, it's all around the Bega Valley, of course, but it'll give you an idea of what data we have got available. And that's something, I think there's about 170 data insights there. And we've got more we can actually build on that as well. But I think we've got access to the data. I've said more on the data, but what we haven't got is the community stories around that data, which is now what we're trying to build.
Thank you. I wanted to mention and give you an opportunity, Carl. I saw your comment in the chat, which I think is a really, important distinction depending on which communities we're working in and who we're trying to impact. Like some of these practices may not be feasible at a population of, over 9 million people in LA County, right? Versus a small rural community. Did you want to speak to that? Yeah, go ahead.
It's sort of an obvious point, but I think maybe the best I could do is I'm an architect, and I've been doing a kind of a big deep dive into an extraordinarily well-designed community in Davis, California, which is now 50 years old. So it really models like how to do it in both now that because it's 50 years old, it shows the ecological and social benefits of a well-designed community. And I'll just post something and happy to share that with anybody who care. It's been a link to Australia, a really important permaculture founder, Bill Molson, and Jeff Lawton championed it and think that it's kind of like the best ecological social community. So I mean, there's many lessons about building community and designing it into it. But anyway, I'll just leave it at that. But I'll post something, and if people want to have that conversation, I'm happy to do that.
Thank you. Yeah, it would be great if you could share any resources in the chat. And are there any additional questions I
I
could have
can always
shared in
ask more
the chat?
questions. I've got
Well,
lots of
I have a
curiosity.
question too, so
I'll let you go since I already asked one.
I would like to ask my question, which is really just back to this point that I mentioned up at the top about like ongoing trauma. This was something that we had talked about, April. I understand like there have been other climate disasters in Bega Valley in the intervening years. Here in LA, we are dealing with, the trauma of our immigrant communities being scared to go outside right now. Like, what are any, if any, I know this is like a big question and maybe just want to pose it as a feeling or an experience that's happening here. I was thinking about that example of sitting in the botanical garden that you shared, Carolyn, and how just being in spaces, where something happened can be really healing for people. But just if there's any other reflections that you have on um, building up that resiliency. I know to Tim's point, like can cut both ways that word, but any other reflections on that before we go?
I think one of the things that we've seen is that communities who were more connected before any disaster or trauma occurred would fare better than other communities who had rifts or splits. Um, and you have to deal with those communities differently when you try to build their resilience. You've got to understand that some communities, because of the deep rifts in their communities, um, they won't build the resilience up as high as you want them to. And sometimes you've just got to tailor your expectations of them. But some communities who've got, mid-strength resilience before they're going into a disaster, you can actually, build their capacity to become more connected. And what we saw initially with the fires, it brought them all together and they're all, buoyed to rally around one thing. And then in the midterm recovery, some splits happened. But if that community can have some leaders in there, and that's where the program that Carolyn presented, if you could build up leaders and um, just things and events also positive events where you can do something, actually do like make things together or have something you can all rally around and everyone's focusing on the same thing and making something or doing something or recovering building a garden, doing performance, something like that. It brings people together and they start to create more stronger friendships. Um, yeah, so in our valley now, most of the communities are going quite well, but there's always pockets of communities that they just can't get over their rifts. Carolyn or Tim, you got any other ideas?
Yeah, it's interesting. Yeah, we're the Bega Valley is a small population compared to over there, you guys. But it's interesting, even within, you would think there'd be a lot of similarities within the communities within that smaller population. But we've got quite distinct different demographics in that area, which have got different needs and got different viewpoints and have got different sort of. So when you're looking at, that common voice, it's sometimes hard to cut through because everybody's got a different point of view, even in those sort of things. So the smaller community doesn't necessarily mean that everybody's got a common view or united. It actually can sometimes make it a bit harder because
Totally.
you got to watch. This is something I've learned. It's almost moving from one country to another when you're moving from the north of our area to the south. These are probably four distinct areas, and they've all got their own views and were affected differently through the bushfires.
Well, thank you. Thank you for responding to that question. I am mindful of folks' time. We're already a couple minutes past. Thank you for staying over. I think at this time we will wrap. Maybe we could stop recording and this be the end of our